All right, let's talk about the hidden director inside of your brain. It's a system that's pulling the strings on basically everything you do, every move, every thought, even how you feel. We're talking about the basal ganglia. And our whole story today kicks off with just one simple and kind of unsettling observation. Fidgety, it's a word we all use, right? But for this one 39-year-old man, it was actually the very first sign that the gatekeeper inside his brain, well, it was starting to lose control. What seemed like simple fidgeting was about to unravel into a really profound medical mystery. So this is where we start, with a man whose body seems to have a mind of its own. You can imagine, his family is getting really worried. His whole life is being turned upside down. And nobody has any idea what's causing it. And look, the range of symptoms here, it's just staggering. I mean, it's not just about the physical stuff. Those uncontrollable, jerky movements have a name. They're called chorea. But it goes deeper. It's cognitive too. He's becoming forgetful, can't focus, and then it's emotional. His whole personality is shifting. He's irritable, withdrawn. It's like he's becoming a different person. So this is the big question for the doctors, right? What single part of the brain could possibly tie together our movements, our thoughts, and our emotions so tightly that if it starts to fail, everything begins to fall apart? Well, the answer, it turns out, is buried deep inside the brain. And that answer is the basal ganglia. Now, it's not just one single thing. Think of it more like a committee, a collection of structures that work together as the brain's ultimate action selector. It's the part of you that decides what you do, and just as importantly, what you don't do, every single moment of the day. Okay, so where is this thing? Well, you're not going to find the basal ganglia on the surface of the brain. They're subcortical, which is just a fancy way of saying they're nestled deep down inside the cerebral hemispheres. Kind of like the central processing unit, the CPU, for the whole operation. All right, let's zoom in and meet the team. The main players in this network have some names you probably don't hear every day. We've got the caudate nucleus, the putamen, and the globus pallidus. Yeah, I know, but these are the core components, the big three, that work together to manage everything the brain wants to do. Okay, I'll admit, the terminology here can get a little confusing. Neuroanatomists just love grouping these things in different ways. But if you're going to remember just one grouping, remember this. When the caudate and the putamen are talked about together, they're called the striatum. And the striatum is super important because you can think of it as the main input station for this whole system. So what does it all do? Fundamentally, the basal ganglia is a gatekeeper. That's the key idea. It doesn't come up with the ideas for movements on its own. Instead, it gets all these potential action plans from the cortex, the thinking part of your brain. And its job is to decide which ones get the green light. You can honestly think of it like a bouncer at a nightclub, deciding which actions get in and which ones have to wait outside. So how does this gatekeeper actually do its job? I mean, it needs a way to say yes and a way to say no, right? Well, the basal ganglia does this using two amazing and competing circuits, the go pathway and the stop pathway. And honestly, the basic idea here is super simple. The go pathway, sometimes called the direct pathway, that's your gas pedal. It picks a desired action and basically yells, let's do this. Then you've got the stop pathway, the indirect pathway, and that's the brake. Its job is to slam on the brakes and veto all the other competing, unwanted actions. The GO pathway is really fascinating in how it works. So it starts when the cortex sends a signal to the striatum. The striatum then does something kind of weird. It inhibits the globus pallidus. Now, the globus pallidus is a part that's normally putting the brakes on everything. So when you inhibit an inhibitor, it's like a double negative, right? It's the brain's way of taking its foot off the brake. This frees up another structure, the thalamus, to send a huge go signal back up to the cortex. And boom, you're launched into action. It's a really clever process called disinhibition. Now, the stop pathway, it's a little more complicated, but all you really need to know is that the end result is the total opposite. Its whole job is to increase the braking power coming from the globus pallidus. This keeps the thalamus quiet, making sure that all those random, unwanted twitches or movements your brain might be thinking about are stopped dead in our tracks before they even start. So, you see, it all comes down to balance. Every single moment of your life, whether you're picking up a cup of coffee or just sitting perfectly still, it's all the result of this perfectly tuned dance between go and stop signals. It's this constant subconscious negotiation happening inside your head. And that brings us all the way back to our patient, because now that we know how this system is supposed to work, we can finally start to figure out what went so wrong for him. So let's review. We have the symptoms, those uncontrolled movements, the cognitive issues, the emotional changes, and now we have the mechanism, this gatekeeper that's supposed to be balancing go and stop signals. It's time to connect the dots. And here it is, the answer. The patient's MRI scan revealed something crucial: significant atrophy, basically a shrinking, of a very specific part of the basal ganglia, the head of the caudate nucleus. This wasn't widespread damage. It was a targeted, devastating blow right to the heart of the system. Okay, remember how we said the caudate nucleus is a key part of the striatum, that main input station? Well, damage right there is a huge problem. It critically disrupts the stop pathway. In other words, the brain is losing its brakes. The entire system that's supposed to say no to unwanted actions, it's just failing. And without a working brake, that gatekeeper can't say no anymore. The result? A flood of go signals. Every random motor plan, every little impulse suddenly gets a green light. And that leads directly to those spontaneous, jerky, uncontrollable movements we called chorea. That initial fidgeting, it wasn't just fidgeting. It was the sound of an engine revving with no brakes. But hang on. As we saw from that list of symptoms at the start, this story is about so much more than just movement, isn't it? The influence of the basal ganglia goes way deeper, right into the very core of who we are. And the reason why is because there isn't just one big motor circuit. The basal ganglia actually run multiple parallel loops. So yeah, there's one for movement, but there's also an ocular motor loop for controlling your eyes. There's an association loop that's all about cognitive stuff like planning, which totally explains the distractibility and forgetfulness. And there's a limbic loop for processing emotion, which explains the irritability and the personality changes. And this leads us to a really profound takeaway. The exact same go-stop architecture, the same gas and brake system that selects our physical actions, is also being used to select our thoughts and regulate our emotions. So moving, thinking, and feeling, they aren't separate things happening in different parts of the brain. No, they are deeply, physically woven together in the circuits of the basal ganglia. So that leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. If the actual physical hardware that controls your body is the very same hardware that shapes your thoughts and molds your feelings, what does that really mean for that old saying, mind over matter? It kind of suggests that maybe, just maybe, the mind and the matter were never really separate things to begin with.